When winter catches them, they are cold, beating the drums of pain. It is very strange to imagine that the king and queen were wrapped in fur-minus wind robes during the day and turned into shivering humans at night, just like farmers outside the city wall. However, the difference is obvious. While the villagers huddled in single cabins to keep warm, the monarchs attempted to transform the cave-minus-like ventilation rooms into warm and spacious sanctuaries. You smelled the smoke rising from the half-minus-dead fireplace. The flames flickered weakly, unable to resist the cold air seeping out of the narrow windows without glass. This is a fact about the castle that always amazes you. Lack of genuine insulation. No matter how thick the stone is, it cannot keep out the cold. It just absorbs it. When approaching the castle walls in winter, your palms will immediately feel the bone-chilling cold. Historians are still puzzled as to whether the monarch really slept better with his subjects, or is merely pretending to live extravagantly. Where your breathing makes the air on your face misty, is there any difference between a gilded canopy and embroidered bed sheets? Perhaps, but they also have symbolic meanings. The royal bed is more than just furniture. That was a throne placed horizontally. As you go deeper, you will hear the gurgling sound of water in the distant woods, and imagine a huge bed faintly appearing in a room above. None of these are the simple beds in modern life. They are platforms towering high above the ground, covered with straw mattresses, feather nails, wool blankets, and sometimes even bear or wolf skins. You realize that the bed itself has turned into a survival island in a frozen sea of stones. However, the draft never truly left. Curtains were drawn around the bed, not only to protect privacy but also to keep warm. The rustling of the heavy fabric and the low voices on the bed envelop the bed in a mysterious atmosphere. You might compare it to camping under layers of quilts, except that the quilts are woven by royal weavers, and these designs are a loud declaration of wealth. However, a strange idea makes you feel itchy. Even with silk and brocade, the wet fur, sweaty body and the smell of smoldering coal must be inevitable. Hygiene is not my strong suit. You imagine rolling around on the mattress, which is stuffed with feathers that have long been shattered into dust. When you move the weight of your body, small clouds will rise. Add details that are often overlooked. Some kings pack up the entire bed frame like luggage when traveling. Imagine servants dragging carved pillars, canopies and mattress rolls from one stronghold to another, all to ensure that the king does not have to endure unfamiliar trays. The royal bed is a portable power source. The soundscapes have reassembled at the place where the monarch camped and are back by your side. A faint dripping sound came from the place where the snow melted in the crack. The wood moans in the wind. A low bark of a dog came from the courtyard below. Every kind of noise is amplified at night, making sleep unstable. No double-glazed windows, no central heating, only you. The mountain of bedding and the fragile hope that the flame would burn until dawn. You lean against the door of the imagined room, feeling the iron latch cold under your fingers. The king and queen behind the door are more vulnerable than you imagine, without warmth and without attendants by your side. They are just another pair of humans shivering in the darkness. Perhaps the greatest surprise is that none of the rituals in the world can fully conquer the power of winter. The candle was shining in the candlestick, and you returned to the corridor. Your thoughts drift to the large bedroom itself, where the kings display their majesty while secretly hoping that their toes won't freeze to death. This idea makes you smile slightly, because beneath all the crowns and tapestries, the royal family members have the same problem you won't have feeting when camping tonight. You climb up the winding staircase, brushing your hand against the rough chill of the stones. As you approach the upper level, the air becomes heavier. Finally, you enter a large room prepared for the king, and the royal sleep schedule begins to unfold before your eyes. The so-called large bedroom is not merely a place for sleeping. It is a stage, an arena where power and prestige are displayed under the guise of rest. The bed itself occupied the entire room, standing high on a carved platform, surrounded by thick curtains, as if drinking in the flickering torches. You will notice how all these pillars are stretching like miniature towers with embroidered banners on each pillar. These designs are not merely for comfort. Their aim was to make a deep impression and shout at every visiting nobleman or for an ambassador, "Look at the wealth of the monarchs sleeping here." However, strangely enough, it's you. Most people have never seen a real king lying in bed. This room is more of a symbol than a reality. It is usually used for audience or semi-minus public ceremonies, where the ruler leans against a cushion to receive selected guests. Imagine it as a hybrid of a medieval throne room and a bedroom, where the most private furniture also serves as a public backdrop. The mainstream fact is straightforward. The royal bedroom is one of the most heavily guarded and elaborately decorated rooms in the castle. Their tapestries are not only for keeping warm but also for telling stories. Each panel may depict biblical scenes, mythical beasts, or the victory of a dynasty, reminding every person who enters that the bloodline of this monarch carries sacred recognition, that he is an interesting gossip that feels almost comical in the dark. In some records we read that the king kept his favorite hunting dogs at the foot of the bed and even kept parrots squeaking in nearby gilded cages. It is not in harmony with the solemn image. Imagine the royal audience being interrupted by the wild barking of a spaniel or the shrill cry of "God bless the king" from a feathered imitator. Scholars are still debating whether the royal bedroom is more like a living space than a real bedroom. Some people believe that monarchs seldom slept there. They preferred smaller and more comfortable rooms hidden deep within the thick walls of the castle. Others, however, believe that even though the cold has been gnawing at their bones, the magnificent buildings are too important to be abandoned. You sense that the truth might lie between the two. The ritual room is the stage for daily life, while the hidden room is the retreat at night. You can sense the rich and fragrance of beeswax in the air and the smooth smoke from the fireplace. The room is too big to accommodate such a small amount of heating. The deeper you go, the more mist your breath will form. You notice that the bed curtains are tied up during the day, waiting to be tightened when the last wave of leaves at night. These curtains are not made of fine fabric. They are thick brocades lined with fur wool. Just their weight alone can remind you that survival here requires not only beauty but also savage isolation. Your hand slides over the embroidered surface, and you will feel those raised stitches, those small knots sewn by your fingers, which must have hurt for several weeks. This is an artwork used as bedding. Behind the glamorous appearance lies a cruel fact. The king's room was another fortress, not built with stones but with fabrics, feathers and rituals. You glanced at the corner where there was an old little kneeling table for the evening vespers to use. The ritual of kneeling down before going to bed is as important as drawing the curtains. Sleep is not a personal indulgence. It is set as a sacred moment of vulnerability. By blessing themselves before lying down, monarchs not only seek protection from the cold, but also from the mental dangers lurking in the dark. Meanwhile, the number of attendees has been hovering. Attendant, guard outside the door. In this space, no king is truly lonely. Privacy, a modern luxury that you take for granted, hardly exists. Even the act of taking off clothes was recorded in daily life. Strangely enough, in a room built to display power, intimate sleep has become a public spectacle. Look around finally. Velvet canopy droops slightly. The crackling of flames and the echoes of footsteps tell you that this room is for display, not for comfort. Somewhere behind these walls, perhaps the monarch has a smaller room to keep warm. But this is the official stage, the grand declaration of the royal rest, even though the reality is that the limbs are stiff and the toes are half cold. When you close the heavy wooden door, this problem lingers on. Do the kings really sleep well here? Or is that big bedroom just another disguised throne? You slipped into another carved oak door and suddenly felt that the air was different. The room in front of you is controlled by a huge structure and looks almost alive in the darkness. You stopped. When you realized what you were looking at, you held your breath. The medieval canopy bed in its immortal glory. This is not the kind of furniture you can buy in modern stores. It is more like a wooden fortress within a fortress, which can both inspire and provide isolation. That can both showcase the splendor of the royal family and prevent the residents from turning pale in the middle of the night. When you approach it, its size leaves you at a loss. These pillars are like trees carved with vines, wild beasts with heralds, or saints staring at you with strange expressions. Above your head, the tree canopy spreads out like a roof, with thick fabrics and tassels embroidered on golden threads, and the light of torches flickers. You imagine lying beneath it, looking up at those patterns, half drowsy and half aware of the weight of the wealth that envelop you. First, there are the mainstream facts. The design of the canopy beds in medieval castles is both grand and practical. The canopy supported by tall columns is not only decorative. It serves to block the airflow falling from the high stone ceiling and the thick curtains from a warm little cocoon. When the curtains are drawn, it's like setting up a tent in a room, a cozy space where the king and queen can finally escape the bone-chilling air of winter. Slide your fingers on the fabric and you will feel the texture of wool velvet, and sometimes silk imported from afar. The weaving is very dense, which is to block the air, not just to look beautiful. Oh, and the inner layer. A mattress filled with straw, topped with a feather bed, perhaps with an additional layer of wool filling, followed by linen sheets, then a blanket and a fur blanket. Imagine it as a layer of warm cake. Each layer is another line of defense against the cold that crawls in from the stone floor and seeps in through the blinds. But there's a strange little flower edge here. Some of the beds were so large and exquisite that the monarch had to take them apart and move them around during his travels. Imagine a group of servants dragging carved bedposts, embroidered curtains and bundles of mattresses through the muddy winter road, just to enable the king to sleep in a familiar and comfortable place several miles away. A bed is not furniture. It is an extension of the monarch's body, and wherever he goes, it is carried with him like a snail's shell. However, scholars still have differences of opinion on exactly how effective these magnificent buildings are. Can these huge canopies really absorb enough heat? Or are they mainly symbols of power, merely receiving a little warmth? Some people believe that thick curtains create a truly comfortable microclimate. Others, however, believe that the size of the room and the lack of insulation mean that no matter how many curtains there are, they cannot completely keep out the cold. This is an enduring debate because no one today can perfectly replicate the experience of sleeping in a 15th-century royal room, using genuine fabrics, without modern radiators, and with a fire that goes out at 3 in the morning. Tool beside. Yes, many beds require steps due to their height. Once you lie on the mattress, you will notice how often uneven it is. Bound beds are luxurious, but they tend to clump up, and the linen sheets under fingers are even rougher than modern cotton sheets. You rolled over, and the fabric curtain dropped beside you, blocking out the wind from outside. This is a relief. Suddenly, the wind passing through your cloak stopped. The air in a small pocket was a little warmer, but still carried the curling smoke from the fireplace and the musk of fur. In your imagination, waiters are busy nearby. After confirming that the cold and the bed heater had completed their work, a servant pulled the bed curtain. Perhaps a maid placed another wolfskin on the monarch's feet. You heard the faint rustling of the receding boots, the clicking of the door, and finally the silence. This sense of isolation is powerful. You are surrounded by a cocoon, not only wrapped in fabric but also in a ritual. Think about its symbolic meaning. Sleeping in such a building means declaring that your body is precious, worthy of protection with curtains and carvings, and worthy of the efforts of dozens of people to maintain this mobile fortress of sleep. The bed is a stage with a throne lying on one side, but it is also a safe cave that can withstand the immense cold inside the castle. You realize that the feeling of lying here is a contrast. Above the canopy, it is heavy and magnificent, reminding of responsibility and performance. Around you, the curtains trap the heat, making you feel like a child curled up under a blanket. The soft lawns under the mattress remind you that no matter how grand it is, that bed is still a place where bones squeeze, where the spine aches, and where restless dreams come. You start to wonder what those dreams might be like. Imagine that with the howling wind outside the stone wall, the occasional century-long howling, or the barking of a dog in the distance. you gradually fall asleep. Perhaps your sleep is uncomfortable, entangled by illusions of war, politics, or betrayal. The next morning, court officials will come to greet you one after another, and the bed where you have been trembling all night will serve as the backdrop for diplomacy. There is one thing lingering in your mind. Canopy beds are usually very precious and are included in the royal list along with jewels and crowns. They are family heirlooms, passed down from generation to generation, and word is dismantled and rebuilt in the new castle. Some are even preserved in the form of fragments in today's museums, which is a powerful proof of the serious treatment of sleep art or sleep hallucinations by people in the Middle Ages. The flickering of the torch dimmed, and you were left in the nearly dark corner of the curtained space. The air was getting closer and closer, and your own breathing gradually warmed it up. You felt a strange combination of claustrophobia and comfort. Yes, you were blocked by the airflow, but you were also trapped in the embroidered walls. Imagine you lie here for hours, waiting for sleepiness to come, listening to every stream and every whisper of the castle at night. When you imagine it, you will realize that the canopy bed is more than just furniture. This is the complete ecosystem for survival in the Middle Ages. Part warm, part theatrical, part velvet and wood prison. Climbing in is an admission of one's own vulnerability. To display it is to display majesty. When you draw the curtain of your imagination tight, duality adheres tightly to you. Keep the storm out, hoping to wake up in the daytime rather than in the eternal darkness that people often feared in the Middle Ages. You dragged your feet along the corridor, listening to the soft echoes of your boots hitting the stone slabs. Another door faintly appeared ahead. When you pushed it open, you immediately realized that this was not a private refuge. Compared with the large room you left, this one is very wide, with a low ceiling and more than one bed inside. A kind of existing silence lingers here, as if there were once voices whispering in the dead of night. This is a shared sleeping space, and this arrangement will shock your modern sense of privacy. The mainstream fact is very simple. In the Middle Ages, royalty and nobility seldom slept alone, in perfect seclusion. The large bedroom can accommodate the king's large bed, but on its tracks there are smaller beds, trays or carriage beds for courtiers, attendants or popular guests to use. Imagine that when someone is lying a few feet away, you are trying to fall asleep, steady breathing or snoring like a trumpet. The idea of providing a private bedroom for everyone is modern. At that time, whether it was family members, servants or servants, sleeping together was not only very common but also expected. You can imagine it very clearly now. A huge royal bed with curtains occupied the center of the stage. On both sides, the narrower beds are pressed against the walls. This could be a popular knight, a private secretary, or a noble companion who needs to visit immediately at dawn. The servants often spread out trays on the floor near the fireplace and were grateful for any warmth they could grasp. This room turned into a patchwork of sleep, with a pile of corpses crammed into a well-ventilated room. However, there is a strange detail here that will make you smile. There's some records tourists wrote that they were startled awake when a royal dog onto their beds, or when the waiters whispered to each other long after midnight. Imagine that half of the business in this kingdom is just muttering to oneself in bed, like the dormitories of a boarding school, except that the stakes are political alliances and international treaties, not stolen sweet. Historians are still debating just how intimate these common arrangements were. Some people believe that the king and queen can endure intimate company every night, and the cold in the castle means the warmth of a group. Others, however, believe that these arrangements are situational and more for the needs of travel or etiquette. The evidence is alluring but incomplete. Is the royal bedroom more like a crowded tent? Or when monarchs truly needed to be alone, did they sometimes hide in smaller, more secluded rooms? You stroked one of the small wooden bed frames with your hand and noticed that it was a huge canopy you had left earlier. The wooden boards are rougher, the covering is thinner, and the sense of nobility is completely absent. However, from his own perspective, this small bag is of vital importance. Imagine that as a private attendant, you are ordered to sleep in a place where you can hear, so that if the king calls you in the dark, you can respond immediately. Vigilance has never ceased. The air here feels even more intense, exuding an air that can hardly be called that of an emperor. The damp wall, smoke and the presence of people interweave, creating an atmosphere that is both intimate and suffocating. You can imagine the scene at that time, the servants whispering to each other until the attendant ordered silence. The cracking sound of embers in the fireplace, the puffing sound of someone curled up on the floor. The sleep here is not silence, but a kind of public whisper, a background hum of life within the stone walls. This common aspect tells you something profound. Even in the royal family, at the most vulnerable moment, the boundary between the ruler and the subjects became blurred. Sleeping in the same room as to share humanity, acknowledging the need for warmth, companionship and vigilant protection. The bedroom is not a lonely fortress. This is a dependent hive. People can't help laughing at how embarrassing this might be. Imagine the king tossing and turning, half asleep and half awake, muttering to himself, while the courtiers lying a few feet away pretend not to hear, or the queen getting up in the middle of the night to pray, but the maid stands waiting, their eyes moving blurred. Whether they like it or not, this is part of the night ritual. You thought of the symbolic weight again. The presence of multiple beds marks hospitality and hierarchy. Being invited to sleep in the royal room is not only convenient but also an honor. You are trusted to the point where you can get close to the monarch's most private places. At the same time, you are also trapped, showing off all the time and anywhere, never having any obligation. The atmosphere becomes even more lively when you imagine yourself sliding into these small beds. The mattress was uneven and the straw under the linen she trussed would draped a wool blanket over your shoulder. It rubbed against your skin and made it itchy, but it was very popular in the night air. Passing through the room, you can hear the sound of the heavy curtains on the royal bed being drawn, forming a dull cocoon. Outside the curtain, all you have left is the humming whisper and the wind sneaking in through the tightly closed window. It sounds strange that some nobles even deal with trivial matters in bed. Imagine a courier half-minus sitting on his lap with parchment, scribbling notes by the candlelight, while another courtier dozes off beside him. The boundary between the workplace and the bedroom has blurred to an absurd extent. This room is an all-day office, a cemetery and a sanctuary. The longer you think, the richer the academic debate will be. Is such an arrangement practical in a well-ventilated castle? Or is this a political drama reminding everyone of their dependence on the king? Some people think both exist. A compromise between warmth and control. For you, standing in the ghost of this room seems undeniable. Sleep in the Middle Ages was woven with power, loyalty and necessity. You let your imagination fly further. It's late at night. The flames gradually dimmed and turned into scorching embers, and the room was filled with steady breathing sounds. Whether awake or lying down, staring at the silhouettes of the tree crowns in the darkness, knowing that the king might speak at any moment, everyone here would jump out of bed. This is not rest in the modern sense. This is more like a state of preparation disguised as sleep. When morning comes, the room will come alive again. The servants folded the blankets, the courtiers straightened their coats, the monarch stretched his body under the fur, and the attendants drew the curtains. The intimacy of the night has vanished, leaving only rituals and routines. However, you cannot completely forget that during those fragile few hours, the royal family and their subjects shared the same air, the same drafts, and the same restless dreams. You return to the corridor, and the silence of the shared room still echoes in your ears. You realize that privacy is a luxury that even kings and queens can't buy. In these cold winters and these huge stone halls, sleeping is collective, survival is collective, and the night does not just belong to one bed, but too many people. The next room you enter is decorated almost dramatically. What you notice is not a master bed covered with scattered trays, but several grand bed frames lined up along the wall. The bed frames are made of pure oak and the bedspreads are embroidered all over. It is neither the comfortable shared intimacy you just left, nor the solitary grandeur of the royal canopy. This is different. You stopped, tilted your head, wondering why there were so many beds in a royal room. A straightforward historical fact is that in the Middle Ages, the rooms of royal families and nobles often had more than one bed. The reason was not so much related to romance as to politics. In some courts, it was common for monarchs to receive distinguished guests, powerful allies, and even rivals in the same sleeping space. The second bed is decorated very magnificently, aiming to express hospitality, trust, and a carefully designed intimate relationship. Imagine the message it conveys. You are very important. You can sleep under my eaves, very close to me. I am willing to let you share my sacred room. If you walk past one of the secondary beds, you will find that it is not a junk stuffed in the corner. Its pillows are carved, the linen is elaborately arranged, and the bed sheets are studded with gold threads. Lying on this bed is not an insult. It is a symbol of royal favor and an embrace of the core of power. You can imagine that the ambassadors from distant countries are lying in such quilts, unable to sleep, with the awe of honor and the anxiety about the implied meaning intertwined. But then there will be an interesting gossip that will make you chuckle. In some families, these extra beds are not always reserved for living guests. Their decoration is purely for display, so that anyone entering the room can see that the monarch is always ready to entertain guests. Just like having a permanent guest room, guests other than Ear may never come. But bed itself became a diplomatic prop, whispering our court's generosity, our hospitality. However, scholars are still striving to explain these multiple beds. Are they really used as places for tourists to sleep? Or are they symbolic gestures, more dramatic than actual rest? Some people think that outsiders seldom spend the night beside the monarch's bedroom. Others, however, believe that this situation occurs much more frequently than we imagine. In a world where the binding force of written contracts is less than that of shared experiences, this is a necessary step in forming alliances. The argument lingers on and remains unresolved, just like the faint fragrance woven on the shawl fabric. Now you can depict the scene at that time. Morcuvi the king was lying on a big bed, and the curtains were drawn like a fortress. A beloved ally was lying on the second bed a few yards away. It is not concealed, visible, or fragile. To some extent, it implies trust, but it is also surveillance. The waiters were curled up on the trays by the fireplace. As soon as they heard the sound of trouble, they all woke up. This was both a pajama party and a political summit, as well as hostage negotiations disguised as hospitality. Approaching an unused bed, I stroked the embroidered bedsheet with my hand. They are cool and brittle linen fabrics, harder than modern fabrics but very beautiful. The pillow is made of goose down. Above the headboard hung a tapestry with a saint or perhaps a family crest painted on it. The sewn figure's eyes were gazing down, as if blessing or judging the person lying there. Then imagine that awkwardness, the rustling of the blanket, the gurgling of the wood, the intimate sounds of sleep, all shared between the king and the guests. The ambassador's snoring might awkwardly echo in the room, while the king is awake, gritting his teeth. Perhaps on the contrary, the king himself snores loudly, while the guests toss and turn, unable to sleep in pain, forced to endure in polite silence. It makes you laugh to yourself and also makes you reflect. The knights of the Middle Ages were neither secluded nor silent. Every movement, every breath is part of the public theatre, and even the rest turns into a performance. The sensory details are back. You can smell the faint scent of the lavender sackets used for insect repellent in the bed sheet. Sound of the fireplace desperately resisting the through wind. You feel the mattress unevenly soft under your hand, stuffed with feathers but have turned into lumps. Most importantly, you can sense the presence of power, not only in people but also in the furniture itself. These beds are not passive. They are props in the game of kingship. A strange story lingers in your mind. A chronicler once noticed that in a royal room were displayed 4 beds, all covered with magnificent curtains, although there was no record indicating that they had ever been used. Perhaps they were trying to make a deep impression on the visiting dignitaries, or to imply that the monarch's court could receive dozens of guests at will. You wonder if all of this is just bluffing, with the luxurious bed empty, just like a gilded chair at a banquet with no one in attendance. Scholars are still debating. Is this practical necessity a place for the favored ministers to rest, or merely a symbolic performance? Is this room a hotel suite or a theater where the bed plays the role of generosity, security, and wealth? You once again linger at the foot of the royal bed, seeing how it dwarfs the others. The hierarchy is very clear. The king's canopy rose high. The curtains are twinkling. The brilliance of the embroidery is dazzling. The other beds are all very good. Yes, but never equal. Visual information is unmistakable. Hospitality exists, but hegemony never ceases. You imagine yourself sliding into one of the guest beds. The linen is very hard and the air is very cold. On the other side of the room, you can hear the king's low cough behind the curtains. You want to know if you can sleep well, knowing that guards are patrolling outside, knowing that you were both honored and under surveillance. The more you think about it, the more you will realize that the beds in medieval castles were not just for comfort. They are about choreography. Who was placed there and who was seen, who hid behind the curtains, and who slept closest to the royal family. These decisions might change the alliance, consolidate friendship, or trigger jealousy. The arrangement of one night may affect years of politics. So, you took one last look and left the room. The bed was neatly made, as if waiting for someone who might never come. You should understand that in this frozen castle, the stone walls are cold, the fire in the fireplace crackles, and even the act of sleeping has been woven into the dance of politics and power. The corridor bends again. When you enter a room filled with shelves and boxes, you will feel the air is cool. At first glance, it may not seem as impressive as a grand canopy room, but your eyes will soon be drawn to piles of neatly stacked fabrics in the corners, folded on the benches and hung on the shelves to dry. This is the world of wool and fur, the nameless heroes sleeping in the Middle Ages. Here, textiles are not merely for decoration but for survival. A care detail can be seen from the existing records. The number of layers of bedding is astonishingly rich. The king and the queen did not need to rely on a blanket to get through the night. Instead, they covered themselves one by one with wool sheets, pleated quilts and thick quilts until their weight crushed them. Each layer can insulate more effectively. Each new piece of fabric serves as a barrier between the royal body and the cold air rolling down from the stone walls. Touch these blankets with your hand and you will immediately notice their rough texture. It's a bit scratched, but it's woven very densely, thickly, and practically. Warmth does not come from softness, but from weight and insulation. Down there, imagine a donkey stretching out. It could be a fox, a wolf, or even a human, if you want to show off your wealth. The scent of the fur faintly exudes the aroma of earth and musk, reminding people that they were once living creatures, but are now forced to serve comfort. Strangely enough, some records tell us that fur was sometimes borrowed from ritual cloaks and reused at night. Imagine the queen sliding down her coronation robe, not for splendor but for warmth. To modern people this sounds almost absurd, but in a castle where the wind is wriggling like an invisible snake, is the dual effect of heat preservation. Researchers still have differences of opinion on the effectiveness of these layers in practice. Some people think that when you stack 4 or 5 thick blankets together and cover them with fur, the warmth will be more than enough. If the fire in the fireplace is still smoldering, it can even be suffocating. Others, however, believe that the large amount of cold air seeping into the blinds and chimneys means that the heat dissipates almost immediately, and the royal family members are wrapped up, but they have never truly felt comfortable. The question is, are these layers sufficient? Or were the king and queen's fingers still stiff from the cold when they were awake? In your mind, you are sitting on the edge of such a bed, dragging the first woolen blanket to your chin. The weight presses on your chest, strangely reassuring, as if anchored in the night. Another layer is on top, heavier, with patterns featuring embroidered borders to indicate identity. Then, there was the thick fur, almost suffocating. When the final covering is spread out, You will feel as if you are wrapped in fabric. Comfort, yes, but there are also constraints. Flipping must be a clumsy move, requiring the movement of dozens of pounds of material. Then there are the scents: the linseed oil left over from unprocessed wool, the faint musk from animal skins, and the smoky perfume absorbed from fire. You took a deep breath and realized that medieval sleep had its own smell, a mixture of earthy and pungent scents, far removed from the sterile aroma of modern laundry detergent. Some chronicles retain a strange little detail, mentioning that bedspreads can also be stuffed in the seams with herbs: lavender, rosemary, or chamomile. This is not merely for the pleasant fragrance, but for the health benefits of purifying the air and preventing diseases. Imagine a waiter shaking a blanket in the morning and small twigs dropping to the ground. This is a subtle ritual that is both hygienic and superstitious, are also very important. These are not ordinary covers but works of art. The quilt is embroidered with the symbol of the dynasty, the fur is edged with silk, and the wool quilt cover is embroidered with patterns, aiming to leave a deep impression on the tourists. But it is also a drama, and every blanket plays a role in the performance. However, this question still lingers in your mind. Can all these layers really wipe away the cold bones of the stone room in January? Some scholars believe that these layers work very well, generating some trapped air, just like the original version of a down quilt that insulates heat. Others countered that the scale of the cold even defeated the heaviest froze, leaving the monarchs tossing and turning, even though they had textile fortresses. The answer may never be certain, but this debate adds another wrinkle to your understanding. Now close your eyes. You feel the weight of these layers pressing down, the heat gradually accumulating, and a close to you terrifying sensation of being wrapped up like a child. But strangely enough, this is comforting. Your shoulder is in pain because it can't move. You imagine drifting into a dream, listening to the low sound of the wind outside the curtains. The curtains are wrapped in fabric, serving as both a symbol of status and an insulator. In mid-minus air, you will notice something else: the pure labor behind these layers. Each covering must be woven, dyed, embroidered, cleaned and maintained by a large number of servants. This wool comes from flocks of sheep that farmers graze in distant fields. The fur comes from hunters who brave the dangers of wilderness and snow. Embroidery is accomplished by patient fingers bending over the frame for months. A night's sleep at the Royal Night is not merely an accident of wealth. This is the end of countless hours of human toil. When the flame flickered low, you lingered in that thought. Sleeping in a medieval castle was not the silent and lonely act you know today. It is public, political, and, most importantly, labor-intensive. Each blanket on the bed represents the power, trade and social order of weaving into fabric. You have wrapped yourself in another layer of imagination, and now its weight is almost unbearable. You wonder if they are seeking warmth or comfort, and their authority even extends to the realm of dreams. The further you go, the more you can feel the enormity of the stone. You stopped in a side passage, where the torch in your hand cast a faint shadow on the wall, seemingly extending upwards forever. The air was sharp and damp, carrying the smell of minerals and moss. This is a part that is rarely mentioned in guidebooks. The stone wall is not a neutral background. They are cold engines that cause discomfort. When winter comes, every surface turns into an accomplice of the cold. From countless architectural investigations, we have learned that castles are miracles of defense, but also disasters of warmth. The thickness of the walls, sometimes exceeding 10 feet, means they store the cold like huge ice boxes. Approach them and press your palm on the uneven surface, and you will feel a sharp pain that is almost metallic. There is no insulation layer here, no barriers of wood or gypsum board. Only the original stones absorb the night frost and call it back into the room. When you imagine lying in bed against such a wall, you can't help shivering. The gaps around the blinds, the cracks in the door frames, and the open design of the stairwell allow air to enter each room. Even thick tapestries are not merely for decoration. They are primitive insulating materials. Hanging them up is not only to show off their lineage but also to mask the constant hissing sound of air sneaking in through every crack. In some family records, There is a strange phenomenon that the nobles would rotate their curtains according to the seasons. In summer, people hang lighter fabrics. In winter, the heaviest wool or velvet is taken out to decorate the walls and even the ceiling. Imagine a servant climbing up a ladder, nailing a huge cloth above his head, and turning a room into a padded box, hoping to soften the cold attack. It seems almost desperate, but it shows how architecture completely dominates the pace of life. Scholars still have differences of opinion on the actual comfort level inside these magnificent buildings. Some people believe that once thick curtains are drawn and tapestries are hung on the walls, the microclimate will become quite warm, at least near the fireplace. Others, however, insist that the overwhelming cold persists, making the castle uninhabitable for most of the year and only serving as a defensive refuge, rather than a true home. As usual, the truth is likely to be hidden among the comfort zones dug out in the vast ocean. You further walked into the imagined room, and the flashlight's light fell on a small arrow-shaped scene. This narrow opening was once used by archers, but in peacetime, it is a permanent loophole leading to the outside. The covering might be fixed in place, but in any case, the wind will still come. You drew closer and heard the faint whistling of the air, constantly reminding you that comfort was secondary. Think about sensory reality. The smell of damp stones. The faint stream of condensed water flowing down the wall numbs the fingertips. The sound effect is very harsh. Every cough or dragging sound is amplified in the echo chamber. Sleep here has never been peaceful. This is a battle between human body heat and architecture. Strangely enough, some medieval materials suggest not sleeping directly against the wall. Beds are usually removed from stones and placed closer to the fire or in the center of the room, leaving a cold air corridor around. This small practical adjustment is not so much for elegance as for survival. This is a subtle change that modern tourists often miss, but it can tell you a lot about daily life. Now close your eyes and imagine. But you strategically place the bed away from the wall. You can still hear the sound of the wind blowing through the blinds. You can feel the stone blowing its chill into the room. The fire in the fireplace made a faint crackling sound, but the heat never reached your feet. It's as if the castle itself is plotting against sleep, constantly reminding you that defense and comfort cannot coexist. The debate among experts has become even more intense. Is it simply about tolerating the cold and accepting it as a part of life? Or did it voluntarily shorten lifespan, spread diseases, and shape the medieval attitude towards the night? Some researchers believe that cold causes chronic breathing problems. Others countered that people had adapted and their bodies had thus become stronger. The debate continues. It cannot be resolved. Perhaps it cannot be resolved, because the subjective experience of the trembling king and queen can never be directly measured. The choice of architecture still left its mark on the ceremony. You would think of court officials drawing thick curtains around their beds, attendants adding fresh wood to the fire every few hours, and maids shaking off the moisture from the wall curtains. The stone wall will never loosen. A castle is a war machine, but for those who have to live inside it, it is also a stubborn and unyielding enemy. Your hand slid over the stone once again, and you felt the chill seep into your skin. You will find that this is the background music of every medieval winter night, the cold, silent hum emanating from brick and stone buildings. No matter how many jewels or flags there are, they cannot change this. Aim-on Arc, who ruled a vast territory, was powerless before the walls of his own room. So you walked away, your torch swaying, and the stones flickering behind you, just like a frozen ocean. Sleeping in this world is not a gentle retreat. This is a tough negotiation with the aim of protecting your building. The corridor narrows and then widens, leading to another hall. The road was immediately marked out by the blackened stones by the stove. You can feel the change in the air because your torch illuminates the walls covered with soot. This is the warm heart of a medieval secret chamber, or at least it attempts to be. The fireplace and brazier were the queen's first line of defense against the long and hard winter nights. One thing we can determine from the architectural remains is that fireplaces became a standard feature of heim-eines rooms in the late Middle Ages. Before this, heating relied on the central fireplace. The flames spread across the floor of the hall, and smoke escaped from the rough vents or simply floated until it seeped through the rafters. When the great castle reached its peak of splendor, the royal rooms had wall-mounted fireplaces, and the chimneys were designed to draw smoke up. These rooms feature carved mantelpieces and elaborately decorated stone carvings, which look impressive, but the warmth they offer is often laughable. Come a little closer and you'll notice how the flames dance but never roar. The fireplace was wide, but the wind coming out of the chimney sucked most of the heat away directly. You stretch out your hand and find your palm very warm, but take a step back, and the cold wraps around you like a cloak. Sitting by the fire is a kind of comfort. Lying on the bed opposite the room is still a gamble. Strangely enough, some monarchs used portable fire basins, which were metal bowls filled with burning coal and could be moved closer to the bed. This idea is very simple. If the fireplace can't heat the entire room, perhaps a smaller portable stove will. Imagine the faint hissing sound of the red embers burning, the faint crackling sound made when the servant threw in a bowl of charcoal. The smell is metallic, smoky, sometimes pungent, a mixture of heat and danger. Because the problem lies right here, smoke. Fire and braziers make it possible to keep warm, but they also fill the room with toxic smoke. Records from family accounts described signs of carbon monoxide exposure such as coughing, headaches and tearing, although no one could name it at the time. Survival is always a balance, either shivering in the cold or risking suffocation in the darkness. Experts still hold different opinions on the heating effect of these huge rooms. Some people believe that a large fireplace burning all night can make the room almost comfortable, at least within a radius of a few yards. Others insist that the vast scale of the stone hall ensures that most of the heat is wasted, disappearing upwards through the chimney or dissipating in the cold bricks and stones. The facts may vary depending on the size of the room, fuel supply and diligence. Now, imagine you are trying to sleep beside these fires. The air closest to the flame is warm and almost hot for your face, but your back is still very cold. You rolled over and pulled the quilt tighter, trying to balance the uneven heat waves. Every crackling sound of the log was loud in the silent night. Sparks occasionally jump and scatter. The light was comforting but not peaceful, twinkling like a ghostly dancer on the canopy curtains. One strange practice mentioned in some chronicles is that servants sometimes would carry a pot of hot ash from the kitchen to the royal bedroom and use it to light a new fire before dawn. Imagine a procession, with drowsy attendants tiptoeing along, holding glowing pans in their hands, the faint hissing of embers reigniting the weary fireplace, and the king watching under layers of blankets, as the warm weather promptly resumed the morning prayers. This is a detail that shows how fragile comfort is. It will never last and always depends on constant care. The sensory atmosphere becomes more acute in your mind. The smell of burning would adhere to every surface, soaking the curtains, tapestries and hair. The floor near the fireplace was covered with dust. The crackling sound of wood at night is both soothing and shocking, just like a musket firing in the distance. The smoke was very low, especially when the dogwood crackled, filling the lungs with bitterness. You closed your eyes, coughed, and realized how entangled your night life was with fire. However, despite all its flaws, the fireplace still became its own stage. Monarchs usually have elaborately crafted mantelpieces engraved with family emblems or biblical scenes, turning the fireplace into a symbol of continuity. Visitors entering the room will not only see the warm glow but also the glow of bloodline. Even survival has become a wonder. When you sit by the imagined fire, arguments linger in your mind. Is this meager amount of heat really enough to counteract the endless air current? Or was it the king and queen lying awake, with one side burning and the other frozen, cursing the city wall built to protect them? Perhaps the truth is that sleep does not come because of comfort, but because fatigue eventually overcomes discomfort. Think again about the servant squatting beside to keep the fire alive. They were very restless at night, busy adding fuel to the fire. In their hands, the survival of the monarch was consoled. The flames would have died out at midnight, leaving only cold ashes and painful dreams. When the last piece of wood shatters into ashes, you feel the fragility of the entire system. The royal power can command the army, raise axes and make laws, but it cannot order the fire to last forever. Finally, every night is a battle between fire and frost, a war that rarely ends in complete victory. As you leaned back, the warmth vanished from your face and the coldness came from behind. Sleeping in this room has never been a perfect place to rest. This is an unstable truce between stones, smoke and flames. Even the richest monarch has to rely on the flickering wood until dawn. The next room you enter is smaller and darker, with wooden boxes lined up inside, giving off a faint smell of iron and soot. A servant was kneeling by the bedside, sliding something strange between sheets. A long Minos-handled frying pan, with metal gleaming, was filled with scorching embers. You will immediately recognize it as one of the strangest comfort tools in the Middle Ages, a bed warmer. Evidence from inventories and household accounts confirms that by the late Middle Ages, bed warmers were common in royal and noble residences. They are simple yet ingenious devices, a shallow metal pot with a lid attached to a long handle filled with hot coal or ashes. Before the queen went to bed, the servant would gently swing or slide the pan under the bedding to remove the ice edges. This is not a central heating system, but in a castle where stones give off frost, it must feel like a miracle. You moved closer and heard the faint hissing sound of the sparks hitting the fabric. The risk is direct. The embers were dangerously smoldering near the wool and linen. This is a delicate dance without the warmth of fire or the warmth of disaster. Many anxious attendants must have been worried about scalding the royal bedsheets, or worse, setting them on fire. However, it requires taking risks. There was a strange little story circulating in the letter. It was about a waiting lady who forgot to bolt the lid of the stove and scattered the burning coal all over the floor. Cries and stomping feet. A bucket of wild water showed how dangerous this night ritual was. Imagine that when you know your bedding has been in close contact with fire just a few minutes ago, you are trying to fall asleep peacefully. There is a divergence in the academic community regarding the effectiveness of these devices. Some experts believe that bed warmers can only offer temporary comfort, briefly heating the bed sheets before the cold strikes again. Others, however, insist that if used properly, they can form a warm pocket that lasts long enough for the sleeper's body temperature to take over. The truth may vary with skill, time and the willpower of the drowsy waiters, whose task is to play with the embers. That seen more clearly. There is wind in the room, but the servant had just finished his work. The monarch slid onto the bed. The sheet was no longer stiff from the ice but slightly warm, and he heaved a sigh of relief. The curtains were drawn, and the firelight gradually dimmed. In those precious few minutes the illusion of comfort prevailed. Then the air gradually regained its dominance, and the bedsheet cooled inch by inch. This cycle repeats itself the next night, and this warm ritual is always temporary. Sensory elements are vivid. You can smell the metallic odor of hot iron and the pungent sweetness of burning coal. Your fingers brushed against the bedsheet, and you felt the residual heat disappear on the glass as if breathing. The sound of a frying pan gently rubbing against the bed frame echoed in the quiet room. This is a kind of comfort accompanied by smoke and risks. Intimacy maintains balance on the brink of danger. There are also some ritualistic elements here. The act of warming up the bed is not only practical but also symbolic, a sign of service and a manifestation of loyalty. Stuffing the scorching embers into the king's bedsheet meant that even in his most vulnerable moments, his sleeping behavior was protected by loyal attendants. The monarch lies in warmth, not only because of technology but also because of people. What are the servants? Imagine that their hands are calloused and charred from using these devices night after night, their nostrils are filled with smoke, and their eyes are watering from spots. They are invisible guarantors of comfort. To help others fall asleep faster, they sacrifice ease. The price that humanity paid for the warmth of the Middle Ages is easily forgotten, yet it burns in every embers. There is also a strange little change. Some records mention that hot stones wrapped in cloth or bricks heated in the fireplace slid onto the bed to release milder and more lasting heat. Unlike the embers pan, this type of pan has a lower risk of catching fire, but it is less intense. The choice between stone and coal is yet another night-time calculation. The balance between safety and emergency rescue. When you pull the imagined quilt over your shoulders, you will think that discomfort must be fleeting. The brief glow will fade within a few minutes, making the sleeper rely on the thick blanket and body temperature again. A bed warmer is a gesture, not a solution, the beginning of a long, trembling night of entrance. However, the ceremony is still very important. It gives the impression that warmth is controllable, and even the coldest castle can submit to human ingenuity. Perhaps this is not for the temperature, but for peace of mind. The psychological comfort that slides onto the sheet briefly kissed by fire. In a world where everything is controlled, even if you have temporarily grasped the meaning brought by the cold, you stand at the door of the room again, watching the last wisp of smoke rise gently from the metal pot, for it has cooled down. While the servants work clearing the dangerous tools, the monarch slept wrapped in the curtains. The same dance of coal and flax, adventure and liberation, will be repeated tomorrow night. When you return to the corridor, you realize that the warmth of the Middle Ages is always fleeting. The fire was out, the fur was cold, and nothing could hold up. Comfort is not permanent but is earned every night through rituals, dangers and unremitting efforts. It makes you smile slightly because, to some extent, this bed warmer tells the whole story of sleep in the Middle Ages. Ingenuity, instability, and never enough. You delve into the sleeping world of the castle. This time what catches your eye is not the bed itself, but the clothes spread on the stool and the bed studs. Here is another layer of forgotten medieval ruins. The clothes people wear when they sleep. For kings and queens, sleeping does not mean wearing silk pajamas or sleeping nothing. This means dressing strategically, layering to keep warm, and turning pajamas into cold-proof armor. The surviving family records clearly tell us that special pajamas do exist. Monarchs and nobles wore long linen shirts, sometimes reaching their ankles, which served both as underwear and pajamas. They wear woolen shoes, thick socks and occasionally gloves. And the most representative one is the eintight. You can imagine a king putting a soft hat over his head and crawling under his fur. When he is in position, tassels brush against his cheeks. Just think how necessary this is. After all, in a room where you breathe crystals in the air, the heat from your head dissipates quickly, so it becomes crucial to cover every inch of your skin. Now, just thinking about sleeping on several layers might make you feel suffocated, but for them, it's the difference between life and shivering through the night until dawn. Strangely enough, some records show that members of the royal family even wore layered corsets at night, basically turning sleep into another form of daily wear. Imagine being wrapped in 2 or 3 woolen clones and groping under piles of blankets, so heavy that it takes determination to turn over. For survival, people sacrifice comfort, and no one doubts the necessity of this. Experts still had differences over the weight of these rock strata. Some people believe that under the protection of the fire and tapestries, monarchs might be able to cope with it simply by wearing plain evening gowns. Others insist that in order to withstand the cold, they must dress up in finery, and sometimes even pull their cloaks over their shoulders. The debate continues due to sporadic descriptions in the list and letters. The fact is likely that the situation of each castle is different, from a painful January to a mild March. Another peculiar detail is the fashion of the eintight. They are not only practical but sometimes also very distinctive, with initials embroidered on them or decorated with fine stitches. Imagine the strange sense of intimacy when the queen takes off her jeweled crown at night and wears only a simple woolen hat. This is a reversal that strips away grandeur but exposes fragility. He smiled, imagining half a European ruler snuggling up in bed, looking like a child from a Christmas play. When you imagine yourself wearing these clothes, you feel that the image becomes clearer. Men in shirts are very hard at first, but then they become soft as they stick close to your skin. The wool socks are a little scratched, but they can protect your feet from the cold bed sheets. This hat can warm your scalp and mask the sounds from the rooms around you. You feel like you're tied up, almost wrapped up. Then you lie on your back. The thick fabric gently presses on your limbs, just like a cocoon, resisting the merciless cold. There are also some psychological factors here. Getting dressed and going to bed is a transitional signal, marking the boundary between the daytime rituals and the fragile rest of the night. Even kings and queens need to conclude their rituals, wash their hands, pray and put on their pajamas. The tying tight, though small, symbolizes the last step towards vulnerability. Some letters from the 15th century even described noble families presenting exquisitely made evening gowns as gifts. At first glance it seemed strange, but when you take the climate into account, it makes sense. A beautiful embroidered linen robe is not only fabric, but also warmth, security, and intimacy. Sleep itself has been commercialized and turned into a currency for expressing affection and feelings. There are also some humorous moments. The chronicles sometimes mention that when court officials hurried through the corridors in the night and were awakened by the alarm or a sudden visit, the servants would smile quietly. Just imagine how insulting this is. A duke, dressed in a linen long shirt, galloped past the stone-built hall, trembling all over, trying to appear dignified. Even the most powerful men and women can only wear underwear in the cold and darkness. The debate among researchers is still ongoing. Are these layers purely practical? Or do they also have symbolic meanings? Some people believe that elaborately embroidered evening gowns are even for showing off status in private, while others think that they prove that even members of the royal family cannot escape the humble necessities of human life. Perhaps the truth is that both are present. Pajamas can keep you warm, but they also reminded everyone, whether a monarch or a servant, that even in bed, status must be sewn into the fabric. Now imagine yourself climbing onto a bed with curtains. Your body is wrapped in wool, linen and fur. Your head is tucked under the hat. You moved once, twice, trying to find relaxation under the heavy pressure. You breathe into your hands and warm them up through the fabric of the gloves. Your skin is pricked by the itching of the wool. Your breasts are tightening layer by layer. Yet you're grateful, for without it, the cold would not come until dawn. Torches swayed in the corner, casting their shadows on a pile of discarded cloaks and boots. The attendants quietly withdrew, letting only the rustling of the fabric as the queen turned over in bed. For a moment the world felt calm, racked layer upon layer, wrapped by curtains. The king or queen is asleep. Then you realize that walking gently back to the hall, medieval pajamas are more than just clothes. They are sewn and woven shields, tightly pulled, resisting the endless winter atmosphere within the castle. In this peaceful time, crowns and scepters are meaningless. The survival depends on socks, gloves and simple nightcaps. The next room you enter is even more magnificent, though not because of its bed or hanging decorations. This room exudes power in another way. Standing in the shadows are people in beautiful uniforms. They are quiet and motionless, and their presence is beyond doubt. These are the attendants, the guardians of the royal family's privacy, the gatekeepers who approach the bed. You can immediately sense that this is more than just a bedroom. This is a stage of continuous negotiation, with the entry being precisely controlled. From official records and court manuals, we know that the bedroom is one of the most restricted spaces in all castles. The safety of the monarch depends on this. Only a few trustworthy attendants were allowed to pass through that heavy door, and each had a specific duty. The Minister of the Interior manages entry and exit. The groom on the stool supervises his personal necessities. The attendants took care of the cows or made the fire, while the guards stood outside carefully. Together they formed human shields in the most vulnerable part of the royal family. Think about the vulnerability of sleep. Although the king and queen had crowns and armies, once they closed their eyes they were completely unprepared. This makes the bedroom the most private and politically charged room in the palace. Who can be allowed to cross its threshold is a matter of trust, and trust is never given easily. Appeared on the family register. The attendant often keeps the key to the room, which is a very important responsibility. Possessing these keys means having symbolic power, reminding people that privacy does not belong solely to the monarch but is mediated by loyal servants. Surprisingly, even the most powerful rulers in Europe relied on a few attendants to protect a sacred wrist. There are also some even more peculiar details. Visiting ambassadors sometimes wrote letters complaining that they had waited outside the palace for several hours and were only allowed in for a few minutes, when the queen was resting in bed. This is not inefficiency. This is a well-considered arrangement. By restricting access, Chamberlain elevated the aura of majesty, ensuring that a glimpse of the royal body, even wrapped in a blanket, felt like a privilege. Researchers are still debating exactly how much privacy monarchs have. Some people believe that kings and queens have secret hiding places where they can sneak away in smaller side rooms and sleep without witnesses. Others, however, believe that the sleep of almost all members of the royal family is subject to some form of supervision, with attendants always by their side, ready to act at any time. Due to the lack of existing evidence, this debate continues, allowing you to imagine all kinds of situations. From the loneliness of being stolen into a secret room to a life that is always on display. Close your eyes and imagine the daily routine every night. Before going to bed, the queen would have her clothes taken off by her attendants. Layer upon layer of clothes were carefully taken out, folded and stored. The attendant should make sure the bed is ready, the quilt is covered and the bed is warmed up. Once the monarch climbed under the curtain, the attendants would extinguish the candles, pray in a low voice, and then retreat to the tray by the door. The room fell silent, but it was never completely quiet. A moving boot and a pile of armor remind you that you are never alone. Sensory experience is complex. The heavy wooden door slammed shut, but you could still hear the faint whispers of the guards in the corridor. When the waiter bowed and left, the rustling of the fabric was the last sound before going to sleep. The air was filled with the smell of beeswax and dashes. Behind the curtain, the monarch took a deep breath, trying to forget that the others were standing a few feet away watching. An interesting little episode survived from the court chronicles. Once, a servant was on a night patrol when he tripped over a dog curled up at the foot of the bed. It is said that the half-asleep king humorously rebuked him, and thus the story spread throughout the entire family. Even in a space filled with silence, surprises and laughter quietly descended. The presence of attendees means that no moment is completely private, not even when tripping in the dark. You begin to realize that a courtier minister is more than just a guard. They are the managers of the images. They decided who could catch a glimpse of the monarch lying in bed, who could submit the petition, and who could share those intimate moments. The right to use has become currency, and competition follows. Being shut out of a room means having one's influence cut off. Being admitted itself is standing on the edge of power. There is endless debate in the academic circle about this. Is this arrangement mainly for personal safety or for performance? Some people believe that it is necessary to attend frequently to prevent assassinations, rebellions, or betrayals. Others, however, emphasize the ritual aspect, that is, the bed becomes the stage and the attendants act as the managers of the stage, ensuring that the monarch is always portrayed as inaccessible, mysterious and chosen by the gods. Perhaps both are correct. Now imagine yourself as a monarch. You hid under the covers, the curtains drawn, and the fire flickered low. You know there are people standing outside the fabric barrier who can hear your breathing. They will jump up when you first hear the cry for help. We're wrapped up, but also under surveillance. You are safe, but never free. It is a mixture of peace and confinement, comfort and unease. Morning came and the ceremony was reversed. A servant drew the curtain, dressed you and brought you a basin for washer. The bedroom has once again transformed from a private refuge into a public theater. You can't separate the two. The place you dream of is also a place for power negotiations, whispers and displays. Locked back to the corridor, but the lesson was still on you. Kings and queens in the Middle Ages never slept alone as you might think. When they sleep, there are people watching over them, looking after them and observing them. Privacy is an illusion maintained by curtains, while trust is strengthened by attendants holding keys. Paradoxically, the monarch's most private room is one of the most politically charged spaces in the entire castle. You gently walk into the next royal room. At first glance it looks as very familiar. The large bed with velvet curtains, the fire in the fireplace hissing, and tapestries hanging on the wall. But something in the atmosphere is different. The air feels heavier and more charged. Here, the bed is not merely a place to rest. This is a stage where intimacy, secrecy and politics merge into one. Contemporary chronicles clearly show that the beds of the royal family often also served as meeting spaces. Parliaments are sometimes held in these chambers. The queen leaned against an embroidered pillow while the advisors gathered together. In your opinion, discussing treaties half-minus wrapped in a blanket might seem strange, but for the rulers of the Middle Ages it made sense. The bedroom is the most private and secure room in the castle, guarded by trustworthy attendants. If one needs to whisper, negotiate alliances, expose betrayal or bestow favors, the royal bed is an ideal table. Imagine this scene. The king propped himself up under the teak canopy. The courier sat on a stool or even leaned against the edge of a mattress. When they were discussing strategies, their voices were deep and tense. The crackling of fire mingled with secret whispers, and each word carried weight. The initial bedroom moment turned into a council room, and the intimate relationship magnified the risks. A well-supported example comes from the French court, where ambassadors were sometimes directly allowed to enter the royal bedroom for an audience. They described the experience as both flattered and disturbing. It is an honor to be so close to the king when he lies in bed, but it also blurs the line. Is this an informal contact or a drama intended to disarm the visitor? Ambiguity is part of power. There are still some even stranger details. The maid's letters described that they would occasionally chat in bed until late at night. The court officials were running around like students who were gossiping. The secrets were exchanged. Rumors ferment in the whispers of yawns, and the alliance is being tested. You can almost hear the suppressed laughter behind the curtains, the hurried silence when the waiter comes in, and the sudden return to sleep. Experts hold different opinions on how much of this intimate relationship is intentional and how much is merely for practical purposes. Some people believe that monarchs deliberately use their beds as a stage to blur boundaries, while maintaining authority and projecting an approachable image. Others, however, believe that this is a natural outcome of the cramped living space, with scarce privacy, and the warmest room naturally becomes a meeting point. In any case, the symbolic meaning endures. Those who are allowed to enter the royal bed stand in the innermost circle. Now imagine yourself in that circle. You sat on a small stool, the fire flickering on your face, and the queen leaned against a cushion embroidered with golden lies. Her hair was loosened, her hands work rust on her knees, but her voice was calm and dignified. She asked you for your opinion on war or marriage. Suddenly you realized that the decision being made in this quiet and dim room would affect the entire kingdom. This intimate relationship makes gravity even stronger. Then came the strangest scene, a royal bed, not serving as a private retreat, but as a platform for ritualized diplomacy. Sometimes, tourists are also invited to witness the queen getting up in the morning or going to bed at night. A ceremony that combines intimacy with grandeur. Imagine you walk into a room and watch your ruler sipping fine wine before going to bed, or reciting prayers while the waiter sets the pillows. This may seem like an absurd individual act, but it is a carefully planned act of power. By sharing these private rituals, monarchs bound their courtier titan, reminded them of their own dependence. There is a strange story about a visiting ambassador who was completely at a loss when invited to talk to a king who was half asleep and half awake. It is reported that the man stammered out his information, not sure whether he was bowing, kneeling or sitting by the bedside. This is almost comical, but it highlights the strange collision of vulnerability and authority at these moments. The sensory world of such a room is intense. The bed curtains locked in the sense of woolen perfume. The fire was crackling with sparks. The air is both warm and tense, making people feel heavy. You hear whispers on the floor, rustling sound of the fabric when the court officials moved restlessly on the stool. The monarch's voice was drowned out by the pillow and pierced through the silence. Every detail intensifies the feeling that the bed itself is a disguised throne. Historians are still debating whether this mixture of sleep and politics weakened or strengthened the authority of the royal family. Some people think this is a dilution, making the monarch seem too humanized and too fragile. Others hold the opposite view, believing that deliberately blurring boundaries magnifies the sense of mystery and leaves outsiders out of balance forever. So many ambassadors wrote to describe the strangeness of being allowed into the bedroom, which indicates that it worked as expected and left an unforgettable impression. Now you hide behind the curtains yourself, lie on the mattress, and wait for the last batch of attendants to leave. You feel the dent in the place where the consultants just sat, and their words still echo in your ears. The flames burned very low, the conference hall became quiet, but the weight of politics still lingered on the fabric. Even in sleep, you can't escape it. Tomorrow such a cycle will repeat itself. Advice by the bedside, whispers by the pillow, decisions made in the fragile space between rest and wakefulness. And the sound gradually faded from your memory. You realized something profound. In the Middle Ages, there was no true boundary between politics and the individual, etiquette and the private. Even the bed, this most private refuge, is the stage where power plays its role. Now you bend down along the corridor to a side wing of the castle, which feels less ceremonial and more practical. The walls are flatter, the ceiling is lower, and the air is fresher. You walk into a room where instead of velvet curtains, there are suitcases, folding tents, and rolled minus-up bedding. This is the world of royal travel beds. No matter where the king and queen's duties or ingenious ideas take them, it is their companion. From the surviving family records, we know that monarchs seldom stayed in a castle for a long time. The court was fluid, moving among palaces, fortresses, and hunting huts. When war or pilgrimage required it, kings or queens ventured into tents, set up in hostile fields, or poled forests. However, even in this situation, they did not give up the ritualistic sleep. The bed was disassembled, placed on a trolley, and then reassembled like a jigsaw puzzle at the place where the royal family needed to rest. Think about what this means. The servants dragged heavy oak pillars through the mud, pulled mattresses wrapped in oilcloth to prevent rain, and carried embroidered curtains across the mountain pass. This is a huge effort, but it is regarded as indispensable. The royal bed is more than just furniture. Even in the most unstable places, it is a majestic and portable symbol, a continuous anchor. One detail recorded in the list of the British royal family is particularly remarkable. Henry VI travelled with a complete disassembled bed, which was carved, painted, and had a canopy completed. Imagine that in the center of a battlefield camp, a gilded bed frame emerges from a carriage, and soldiers are curled up on nearby Scott rays. What an absurd scene that would be. This bed proclaims that even surrounded by mud and fear, the king remains the king. Here is a strange and almost comical note. In some expeditions, the moving beds are so large and so exquisite that an entire team of carpenters is needed to install them. That the tent was taut under the weight of the wooden frame, and servants struggled to set up a canopy in the canvas pavilion, with the road squeaking. You can almost hear grunts, laughter, and murmuring curses, for the dignity of the royal family has been rebuilt in a desolate place. Experts are still confused about the true effect of these travel beds. Are they true comfort or just symbolic gestures? Some people believe that being familiar with their own mattresses and curtains can provide true warmth and psychological comfort. Others, however, believe that the effort put in far outweighs the rewards, because no matter how much fur you pile up, pitching a tent on frozen ground will never give you a sense of home. The lack of consensus indicates how blurred the line between practicality and performance is. Imagine you are in a campaign tent right now. Outside, the snow was creaking under the guards' boots, and the night wind was beating the canvas like a drum. Inside, the royal bed stands proudly, the curtains drawn, and the blanket is covered with thick fur. The brazier beside was glowing, and the sparks splashed onto the damp walls of the tent. You crawl into bed, feeling the familiarity of the same fabric you slept on at Windsor or in the ruins. Even if the ground beneath your feet is muddy, you will still have an illusion of continuity. Sensory details flood in. The air was filled with the damp smell of wool, the smoke from wood, and the faint odor of horsemen transported from the stable. The fire crackled loudly, but it never warmed up the air. The mattress became uneven due to the trip. The feathers have clumped up due to moisture. The curtains blocked out some sounds, but you could still hear the continuous hooves outside. The soldiers' whispers and the occasional clashing of armor could be heard. Sleep was light, intermittent and interspersed with the sounds of war. However, symbolic meaning is more important than other factors. Maintaining the rituals on the royal bed means insisting that even in battle, the monarch is not merely a soldier. His body, his sleep and his dreams were all set to be sacred. Lying on that bed is like bringing authority into the mire. It soothed its followers, reminded its allies, and demonstrated continuity in the face of chaos. There is an interesting little story circulating in the Burgundy court. The Duke's bed was too big and the curtains were too thick. It was crushed by its own weight. The chronic keeper coldly pointed out that the Duke humbly slept on a box that night, which was a rare moment when status bowed to reality. You smile, imagining the laughter of the servants struggling in the darkness to save their dignity. Academic discussions on travel beds involve psychology. Is this an illusion for warfare to maintain control? Some scholars believe that sleeping in a familiar environment, even in a hostile one, can calm the rulers down and make them show confidence. Others believe that these beds were stage props seen by courtiers and allies rather than used by the monarch himself. In any case, the scene of rebuilding the bed on the frozen plain remains unforgettable. Now imagine you lying there. You are the king, or the queen. The tent flapped in the wind, the candles crackled, and the bedspread blocked the curious gaze. For a moment, you wrapped yourself in the embroidered sheet that had touched your skin, and the palisade could pretend that the outside world was not in chaos. You dozed off in a daze, not because of the warmth, but because the ritual made it familiar. You withdrew from the tent in your mind, leaving the bed faintly visible alone in the flickering firelight. You realized something important. Kings and queens in the Middle Ages did not just sleep where they were told. They took their world with them and rebuilt at night, a portable fortress composed of fabrics and rituals. In the winter fields, in the frozen forests, in the misty hunting cottages, the royal bed is always there, carrying an eternal illusion, traversing the uncertain landscape. You left the campaign tent in your imagination and returned to your room in the castle. This one feels different, not because of its size or the quality of its suspension, but because of its atmosphere. The fire in the fireplace was burning, casting a restless glow on the stone wall, but the room still felt dim, almost filled with smoke. You squinted your eyes and realized the reason. The air was filled with a candle minus like mist, and a veil of waxen soot would never be completely lifted. One thing is beyond dispute in the Middle Ages: nights were not illuminated by electricity, but by fire, candles, tubes and oil lamps. In the royal rooms, beeswax candles are more popular. They are cleaner and more expensive than the butter candles used by farmers. The pale golden flames flickered with a more stable light, casting long shadows on the tapestries and canopies. The smell was very sweet, almost like honey, but beneath it lingered the scent of smoke. Even beeswax cannot erase the fact that the stone room was burning. Just imagine a king or queen lying under fur, with the curtains on the bed drawn, and a candle lit on the table or wool lamp beside them. Whenever air flows through the blinds, the flames tremble and the light bends through the room like a dancer. Sleep descends in a half-bright, half-dark, flickering world, neither very safe nor very peaceful. Strangely, tourists' descriptions often mention the smoke in these rooms. Fireplaces are not always painted well, especially on windy days. Wind blowing from the wrong direction may blow thick smoke back into the room, blackening the ceiling, staining the curtains and stinging the eyes. You are coughing in your imagination now. The spicy taste lingers in your throat, and the soft rustling of the bedsheet masks the sound. In a list from the 15th century, there was a strange record that described how after the Queen went to bed, the servants would extinguish the candles and send someone to check the room at regular intervals. Imagine this kind of interference. The half-asleep royal members were awakened by the strikes of flint and steel. As another wisp of smoke spread over the tree canopy, their eyelids also opened. Comfort is not continuous but intermittent, interrupted from time to time by the rhythm of the flames. Experts still have differences of opinion on to what extent such an environment can be tolerated. Some people believe that a large number of tapestries absorb most of the smoke, weakening its effect. Others, however, counter that prolonged exposure would definitely cause suffocation, cover the bed sheets with cigarette ash and clog the lungs. The truth may lie somewhere in between, a mixture of luxury and excitement, with sweet wax and pungent scents disturbingly intertwined. The sensory scenes become vivid. You smell the melting scent of beeswax, the earthy and rich. You heard the faint crackling of the light and the crackling of the wood in the fireplace. Shadows jump along the tree canopy above your head, twisting into strange shapes that seem almost alive. The curtains trap both the warmth and the smoke, making the space both comfortable and slightly dull. There is another strange fact. Lights also have symbolic meanings. Lighting beeswax candles is not only practical but also a symbol of wealth. Due to the high production and trading costs of beeswax, a royal room composed of 10 to 20 candles was not only illuminated but also flaunted prosperity. Every flash has economic weight. Every shadow reminds people that even if there is a smoked butterbut, the common people is still very lucky. Imagine the psychological aspect. The flickering light altered the perception, causing the walls to sway and the tapestry to seem to be moving. You laid your eyes heady, but the patterns on the curtains seemed to layer than the half-brightened, half-dark light. Was that a lion's head just now? Or did it move? Is St. Michael's figure frowning at you, or just at the handle of the flame? In such a wild, dreams and wakefulness blare, then fire and shadow unite to summon ghosts. There is an interesting story circulating. A court official was dozing off on a chair beside the bed, and his wig, or something, caught a chance spark. The commotion of stomping and laughter woke the king up. It was said that he found the scene so ridiculous that he postponed his sleep and watched the poor man's embarrassment. Even in the smoke-filled discomfort, humorous moments pierce through the silence of the night. Scholars have been debating the impact of these lights and smoke on the mind. Is it a comfort, making the night less terrifying? Or does it half-awake people, interrupting their sleep with shadows and smoke? Some people believe that people in the Middle Ages were already accustomed to this kind of sleep, and their bodies were used to shorter sleep cycles. Others, however, insist that disturbed rest shapes their worldview, blending a lucid life with dreamlike impressions. In any case, the gloom of the night left its mark. Now imagine yourself in that room again, wrapped in fur, with your eye tight pulled very low. The candle flickers beside you, and the warm glow falls on your hand. You close your eyes, but the light passes through the curtains. The shadow brushed past your eyelids. The fire burst out, sending a wisp of smoke towards the tree canopy. You turned around, coughed, and then stopped again between sleep and wakefulness. This is a consolation from the royal family, not perfection but compromise. Dawn broke and the last candle went out, leaving only smoke lazily floating in the room. The monarch butterfly stirred, its eyes stinging, and the bed sheet gave off the smell of wax and ashes. Outside, the servants were getting ready to draw open the blinds to let the cold morning air in. The night had come to an end, but the memories of the flickering flames and smoke stuck to the bed like an invisible veil. When you returned to the corridor, you realized that sleep in the Middle Ages was never pure silence or darkness. This is a shadow theater, illuminated by beeswax and wood smoke, where the king and queen are lost in a haze that blurs reality and dreams. The next room feels quieter and softer. You immediately sense its difference. The decoration in the room is more gentle, and the furniture is slightly smaller. The air is filled with the scent of lavender rather than thick smoke. This is the Queen's own space, her private room, completely different from the King's daughter. Unlike the grand beds in the country where political activities take place, the design of these rooms has a different rhythm, blending comfort, ritual and restraint in a unique female realm. The records of the royal family clearly show that the Queen often had her own bedroom. Sometimes these rooms were directly connected to the King by a narrow passage or a guarded door. At other times they are further away, on completely different wings. This separation has both practical and symbolic significance. The Queen supervises her own attendance, manages the family accounts, and requests privacy for ceremonies related to pregnancy, childbirth, or dedication. The royal wedding bed may be displayed on special occasions, but the reality on most nights is separate. Imagine the difference. When you walk in, you will see a bed with curtains and tapestries still hanging on it, but the atmosphere is softer. The embroidered patterns on the wall are saints or flowers, not wars. The seams of the bed sheet have a vanilla scent. Rosemary or lavender is used to soothe the body. A kneeling table is right beside you, reminding you that dedication is always needed at any time. This room exudes an air of intimacy and responsibility. There is an interesting record in the family rules of Queen Isabella of France, which lists the daily affairs of her maidstans. While she was undressing, they stayed closer by her side, helping her pray and even sleeping on a nearby tray. The Queen's room was not lonely but a stage for a group of women, where the attendants whispered to each other until late at night. This is a form of protection, companionship and control. There are still some quirks that make you smile. Occasionally, chronicles mention that the Queen kept pugs and even monkeys in her room. These animals are not only regarded as pets but also as symbols of status. Imagine this dishonesty. The elaborately dressed monarch is getting ready for sleep. A chattering monkey is jumping around on the tapestry, and a little spaniel is curled up under it. It broke the dullness and added a touch of warmth to the originally stiff environment. Scholars continue to discuss how much autonomy the Queen truly has in these spaces. Some people believe that a separate secret room gives women a certain degree of independence. In this space they can shape their own networks and exert influence away from the constant gaze of the King. Others insist that autonomy is limited because every moment is still subject to the supervision of attendants and ceremonies. As usual, the truth may change with the Queen herself. Some people take their parliament as the center of power. Others are like enduring a gilded cage. Close your eyes and imagine yourself lying in this room. You are wrapped in layers of wool and fur, but the scents of herbs and sesame oil soften this experience. The fire was burning very low and a lady was retreating to her bed to take care of her. The curtains close around you, blocking out the sound of the castle. You feel both safe and restrained, both watched and comforted. The paradox of medieval royal families. The sensory details are vivid. You can hear the quiet breathing of the waiters on the nearby floor. The faint whining sound made by a dog as it moves in its sleep. You smelled the lingering fragrance of lavender in your bed. You see the flickering of a beeswax candle, and its radiance transforms the embroidery into a glittering pattern on the canopy. This is by no means the smoke-minus-filled magnificence of the King's bedroom. It is more personal, but still immersed in the ritual. There is an anecdote about a queen who invited her closest ladies to share a bed with her in an especially cold winter, not out of impropriety, but merely for warmth and companionship. This scene is striking. Members of the royal family are huddled among trusted women, whispering prayers and telling stories in the darkness. Despite the weight of the crown, it is still very humanized. You know, at such moments the Queen experienced the night intimacy that the King rarely allowed herself to have. The academic debate over whether these chambers are true sanctuaries or extensions of their duties continues. Was the Queen's bedroom a place for rest or a diplomatic venue for ladies to exchange messages and mediate? Some evidence suggests that both are present. This bed became the center for women's influence to radiate outward, shaping politics from behind the embroidered curtains. Now imagine the dawn coming. The queen stood up with the help of her attendants, murmuring prayers with brazen jewels on. The intimacy of the night once again turned into a ritual. Things that seem private are always any mine as public. Every movement is observed, recorded or remembered. The bedroom has never been hers alone. It belongs to the power network she represents. You walked quietly back to the corridor, pondering over this paradox. The queen's room was milder, more fragrant and more private, but its political overtone remained undiminished. Within its curtain lies comfort and restraint, emotion and responsibility, privacy and performance. Perhaps in the long winter, it offers a small comfort, a place where a woman can shape her influence range, even if wrapped in the fur of a kingdom. You left the queen's perfume room and found yourself in a smaller side room filled with manuscripts, jars of dried herbs and the faint smell of vinegar. This is not a bedroom, rather. It is the profound influence of medieval medical theories on nightlife. To understand how kings and queens sleep in winter, you must enter a strange world of humor, drafts and remedies, from diet to dreams. These medical frameworks govern everything. One thing repeatedly recorded in medical papers is the belief that cold air is dangerous. Doctors warn that the air at night can seep into the human body, erode body fluids and open the door to diseases. The draft is not just uncomfortable. They are believed to cause imbalances in the blood, fat, black bile and yellow bile systems. For a monarch, his health symbolizes the health of the kingdom. Avoiding such corruption has become an important matter for the state, so the arrangement of the rooms also takes this into account. The bed is far away from the wall to prevent cold from directly invading the body. Drawing the curtains is not only for keeping warm, but also to block the invisible current. The fire was carefully controlled. Lunch smoke can clog the lungs, will cause harmful air to settle down. The conference hall itself is imagined as a body that requires balance and moderation. In 15th-century medical literature, a strange prescription was discovered, suggesting placing a few bowls of warm spiced wine beside the bed to purify the air. The rising steam is believed to drive away harmful body fluids. Imagine a servant carefully balancing a steaming bowl of clove-scented liquid beside the monarch's pillow. A strange fragrance filled the room. Modern historians are still unsure to what extent these beliefs have influenced daily practice. Some people believe that the royal family strictly follows medical advice and hires doctors to guide every detail of indoor life. Others, however, believe that the symbolic significance of these prescriptions outweighs their practical significance, and that the waiters are concerned with tangible comforts such as blankets and furs. Due to the lack of consistent records, the debate continues, making us wonder how much superstition governs actual sleep. Now imagine the emperor getting ready to sleep. A doctor was wandering nearby, suggesting which herbs to burn, which foods to avoid before lying down, and how much wood should be placed on the fire. Perhaps the king was told to wear socks lined with rabbit fur, while the queen was told to drink warmed food with nutmeg flavor. This bed serves as both a clinic and a refuge. Its curtain not only covers the body but also the carefully planned health and wellness methods. The sensory details are astonishing. The air was filled with the scents of rosemary and thyme, scattered on the floor to prevent spoilage. The steaming, fragrant wine by the bedside gave off the delicate fragrance of cloves. The fire rose gently, and its smoke wove through the mist of herbs. You will hear the gentle prayers of the attendees mingled with low medical instructions, a chorus of piety and science, if you can call the humoral theory science. Seems almost comical. Some texts suggest keeping live animals indoors as natural heaters. Little pugs and even hens may be kept beside the bed, and their body temperature is believed to be a way to prevent them from being exposed to the wind. When you think of the queen in a coma and a little chicken dozing off under her bed curtain, gently clucking its feathers in its sleep, you can't help but smile. That behind the humor lies persistent anxiety about the disease. The winter in the Middle Ages was not merely uncomfortable. They are very dangerous. Pneumonia, fever and chills can sweep through castles with ease, just as they do through farmhouses. When the monarch is ill, the entire kingdom trembles. Every preventive measure, no matter how strange, is worth a try. Scholars are still discussing whether the obsession with drafts is reasonable. Is this merely superstition, or does the cold air in the poorly ventilated stone chamber really cause diseases? Some people believe that dampness, smoke and cold do indeed exacerbate breathing problems. Others believe that the real danger lies in malnutrition and infection, rather than the air itself. But from medieval doctors, the explanation was very clear. Only by balancing the body fluids well and preventing true drafts can the royal family's body possibly survive another winter. Now hide under the imagined quilt by yourself. You smell the scent of rosemary branches sewn into the crevices of the blanket. You heard the faint bubbling sound of a pot of wine steaming on a tripod. You will feel the strange comfort of wool socks, perhaps soaked through with sweat, but warmer than bare skin. Deep in your heart, lingers a fear any tremor may indicate illness. Sleeping here is not pure rest. This is a night-time ritual of medical defense, a fragile hope against invisible dangers. The morning should also start with diagnosis. The doctor examined the queen's complexion, her sleep quality and even her urine for any signs of imbalance. Dreams themselves are explained through the humoral theory. Excessive black bar may cause nightmares, while excessive blood may lead to tossing and turning. The act of closing one's eyes is itself entangled with science, superstition and symbolism. You walked back to the corridor, breathing in the cool air and shaking off the gloom of herbs and smoke. But you will realize that in medieval castles, sleep has never been easy. This is a medicalized and ritualized act, shaped by fear of drafts and an imbalance of faith. The monarch's body is a microcosm of a kingdom, guarded not only by soldiers and attendants, but also by rosemary branches and steaming fragrant wine. You descend an narrow staircase and enter one side of the castle. The air here feels heavier and straw is scattered on the floor. You are no longer in the gilded rooms of the monarchs and queens, but in the resting places of their attendants. If the king's canopy is a fortress of fabric, then this world is a world of improvisation and proximity. Servants and guards often slept in the same room, were even outside, and their presence shaped the atmosphere of rest throughout the royal family. Evidence from family regulations and payslips clearly shows that dozens of people lived close to the queen every night. The attendants were placing trays in the corner. The guards leaned against the doorframe, while the lower minus-ranking servants spread out their bedding in the available space. Comfort is a privilege of the royal family. For others, sleep means curling up by the stove or dozing off stiffly in a chair. Your imagination is very vivid now. The king or queen hid behind the curtains, and just a few feet away, a sheet of paper wrapped in a coarse wool blanket lay on the flagstone. Suddenly, fire burst out, and the flames fell upon the tired face. Someone moved a little, someone coughed a little, and a murmur of prayer broke the silence. Sleeping here has never been lonely. This is a collective behavior mixed with responsibility and fatigue. There is a colorful note in the chronicle that describes the guards sleeping straight by the door with half a bird in hand. After training, one will wake up at the slightest sound. Imagine a state of being half asleep and half awake, with drooping eyelids, tense muscles, and ears taut in silence. These people do not sleep for themselves, but for the monarch, and their rest moments are always on guard. Here is an even more unusual detail. It is said that some attendants slept directly at the foot of the royal bed, curled up like watchdogs. Its symbolic meaning is astonishing. The body served as barriers, and any movement within the curtains would interrupt their dreams. Imagine the two are so close that you can even hear the monarch's breath, yet you can never enter the intimate bed. This is both an honor and a burden, a loyalty written in exhaustion. Scholars are still discussing the sustainability of such public arrangements. Some people believe that such proximity is a necessary condition for security, ensuring that the monarch will never be protected. Others, however, believe that this is also for control, keeping the attendance rate within a controllable range at all times, so that orders can be issued at any time. The debate is still ongoing. Is a servant a guardian of comfort or a prisoner of duty? Close your eyes and lie down in an imagined tray. The straw is moving beneath your body. There is a faint smell of smoke on the blanket. The farther you stretch your toes, the less warm the fire becomes. Your stomach is growling because you ate half a meal a few hours ago. Around you, the steady breathing of others fills the room like waves. Most importantly, when the king turns over in his sleep, you will hear the faint gurgling sound of the royal tree canopy. You are close to power yet far from it. Sensory elements are layered. Scratches on the skin caused by rubbing a coarse cloth. The gravel of the straw poked out from the scene. The pungent smell of smoke will never leave your nose. A weak breeze slipped in through the crack of the door, brushing your face with cold fingers. You pulled the blanket tighter, shivering, but exhaustion pulled you down desperately. Sleeping under such conditions is not for comfort but inevitable. An anecdote from a late medieval court tells of a servant who was sleeping so soundly by the fireplace that he rolled too close and burned his hair. The colleagues' laughter lasted until the morning, but behind the humor was reality. Fatigue is constant and mistakes are inevitable. The servants endured endless labor during the day and intermittent rest at night. There has always been a debate in the academic circle about whether the waiters really hate this arrangement. Some historians believe that they must have envied the monarch's thick fur and longed for warmth, while they trembled in the shadows. Some people also point out that being placed to the royal bed also means opportunities. Chance encounters, whispers, and potential promotions. A servant curled up on the floor might still be dreaming of power. Now imagine the dawn coming. One attendant rose first and woke up the others in a whisper. The tray was rolled up, the blanket was folded, and the fire was coaxed back into place. The queen stretched out behind the curtain, and the attendants were also ready to help her. Public sleep instantly turned into a busy service. The intimacy of the night melts into the layering of the day. You walked out of the room with all these strange feelings of intimacy lingering in your mind. The sleep of the royal family has never been lonely. It was guarded and surrounded by a group of exhausted people. The king and queen might have been wrapped in velvet, but their rest relied on dozens of exhausted attendants curled up on the stone floor. Power always seems to go hand in hand with people. You go up another staircase which spirals tight and leads to a quieter corner of the castle. Here, the stones feel older and the corridors echo more. You push open a small wooden door and walk into a room filled with sounds rather than visuals. This is the world of a medieval night, an acoustic landscape filled with streams, moans and whispers. When the king and queen were sleeping, the surroundings were not silent but noisy. Even the bravest person would feel uneasy. There is such a description the castle has never been quiet. The wooden beam moved as it cooled, emitting a low groan. The wind howled through the arrow slits, making the blinds rustle. The mouse is hiding in the wall. The owl is barking outside. The dog is barking in the yard. The monarch lying in bed. Drawing the curtains, I was still immersed in the disturbing sounds, with hardly any peaceful space. Stop in the middle of the room and imagine. The canopy curtains block the airflow, but not the noise. Somewhere above the rafters, you hear the clapping sound of a bird being disturbed from its resting place. In the stairwell outside, a guard coughed, and the sound echoed upwards. A little further away, the clanging sound of the iron chain hitting the gate repeated in the wind, just like the heartbeat of iron. It takes a strong will to sleep here. A strange note appeared in a family record from the 14th century. A queen asked musicians to take turns to play gently in her room at night. The sounds of luting, tape recorders, or humming hymns are all meant to drown out the disturbing brook. Imagine that you are not drifting towards silence, but towards a faint melody. A lullaby not sung for children, but for the monarch who rules the empire. Scholars are still unsure about the effectiveness of these measures. Some people think that the constant noise made by servants or musicians is more disturbing than soothing. Others, however, believe that the familiar soft sounds mask the more worrying sounds of stones and wood. This divergence reveals just how subjective sleep must be. One ruler's consolation may keep another ruler awake all night. Now imagine yourself wrapped in fur, with the castle breathing and moaning around you. The curtains blocked your view, making your ears stand up. You can hear the slapping of bats near the chimney, the crackling of wood in the fire, and the slight rubbing of mice on the stones. Every sound is amplified by the silence. Each one reminds us how fragile a sense of security is when darkness approaches. Strangely enough, some chronicles record that the monarch was awakened by imagined threats, ghosts, demons or assassins summoned in a night chorus. The rustling sound by the bedside might be a servant walking around, but for someone half asleep and half awake, that could be the sound of a knife breaking in. The darkness magnifies fear, and the echoes of the castle and the air torrents mercilessly nourish the imagination. However, not all noises are unwelcome. Sometimes the children sleep beside their royal parents, and their gentle breathing or murmuring dreams fill the room with warmth. Those present prayed in low voices, and their voices interwove like comforting threads. Sound of fire can calm people down. Its steady rhythm is a safe heartbeat amid an ease. The longer you stay, the more vivid your sensory experience will be. You can smell ant stones and charred wood, that the dominant smell is the sound. A gust of wind slammed the blinds shut. Dogs will bark loudly before they calm down. The woods are groaning again, and a long, low brook makes you move restlessly under the covers. Perhaps you close your eyes tighter, hoping to fall asleep before the fear grows stronger. One story frequently retold in the chronicles is that a king placed a bell rope beside his bed. At the slightest suspicious sound, he would pull the rope and lift all the guards in the castle. You could almost hear the jingling alarm echoing throughout the hall, servants staggering down from the trays, and soldiers grasping their weapons. Preventive measures speak for themselves. There is no sound so faint that it cannot be ignored. Modern historians hold different opinions on the extent to which nighttime fear influenced medieval psychology. Some people believe that it has given rise to a superstitious culture in which unexplainable sounds are regarded as coming from ghosts or demons. Others, however, believe that it is merely accepted as a part of life, as a natural backdrop for stone buildings. In any case, the soundscape is very important. Kings and queens, like peasants, sometimes couldn't sleep either. Listen, interpret fear. Now, once again, think from their perspective. You lie quietly, wrapped in wool and fur, with your eyes closed and your ears open. Every stream felt magnified. Every whisper is full of possibilities. You hear the sound of a servant's shift nearby. Then came the faint clicking sound of the guard's armor as he walked outside. The castle seemed still alive, restless and unwilling to let you fall into peace. When it comes, sleep is light, blurred by echoes and footsteps and dreams. At dawn the sound changed again. The servant moved, the dog barked purposefully, and the bell summoned the whole family to pray. The whispers of the night vanished, replaced by the hustle and bustle of the day. But do you remember that unease, the way shadows speak through sounds? Even the king would feel powerless when facing the creaking wood in the darkness. You return to the corridor with the echoes of imagination echoing in your ears. You know that the nights in the Middle Ages weren't ever silent. They are filled with sounds, constantly reminding people that although the castle is grand, it is a fragile thing in the face of darkness. The corridor makes a sharp turn, leading you into another room. The first thing you notice is the door itself. It is thick oak reinforced with iron hoops and covered with bolts. On the stool beside was a string of heavy keys. You realize that despite fur, curtains and attendants, true security in a medieval bedroom depends on locks and barriers. If a person suspects that danger lurks beyond the threshold, he will never fall asleep easily. From the list of castles and architectural remains, we learn that the royal rooms are equipped with multiple locking systems. The door is reinforced with thick wood, sometimes in double layers, and fixed with iron bars that slide into the brackets on the wall. In some fortresses, the rooms of the king or queen can only be accessed through a series of smaller backrooms, each of which has its own sentry and lock. Security measures are as layered and complex as bedding, designed to alert intruders that they will be noticed before reaching the royal family. As you approach the imagined door, you can feel the cold bite marks of the iron. You imagine a servant prying open a door at night, with the sound of metal clanging echoing throughout the room. That voice must have been reassuring, drawing a solid barrier between the ruler and the threat. However, even this obstacle is not absolute. Assassinations in bedrooms have not been unheard of. The idea that no lock can ensure safety must linger in every restless dream. A strange annotation appeared in the Chronicle of Edward II. It is said that he often sleeps in different rooms and suddenly changes his position to avoid possible assassins. Imagine servants dragging bedding from one room to another. The attendants were confused about where the king was staying that night. Delusions resulting from real threats have turned the nighttime sleep ritual into a strategic strategy. There is also a strange and almost humorous story about a French nobleman who insisted on locking his room from the inside, but the lock got stuck and he was trapped. It took him several hours to knock hard on the door until the servant opened it. The ensuing laughter undoubtedly masked the real unease. What if the enemy really comes? Locks bring security, but they also bring risks to the tools. Historians still disagree on the safety level of these bedrooms. Some people believe that the number of guards and locked doors make it almost impossible to assassinate members of the royal family inside the castle. Others point out that betrayal comes from within. If a servant or attendant becomes a traitor, no bolt in the world can stop the danger. The debate returned to the same disturbing issue. Safety is as important as loyalty and locks. Now imagine that you are lying in bed, the curtains are drawn, and you hear the click of the latch sliding into place. The fire in the stove hissed, and the servants retreated to their trays, leaving only your own breathing. You tell yourself you're safe, but every sound of the door frame and every sound of the blinds tenses your muscles. You know the guards are standing outside, but can you trust them? Do you know that the Minister of the Interior holds great power? But is he loyal? Sleepiness came late, and I was suffocated by suspicion. The sensory image is vivid: the metallic chill of the iron bolts, the oily smell of the wood when the door is being maintained, and the echo of footsteps in the corridor as the last servant leaves. Silence is not silence at all. This was a pause in waiting. The silence of this house could burst into commotion at any moment. Another strange phenomenon has emerged in some records. Rulers sometimes keep weapons beside their beds. A dagger or sword is within reach. You can almost see a queen's gemstone dagger placed on the table with a prayer book beside it. The wonderful combination of faith and fear. This indicates that even after the heavy lock, the royal family never let down their guard. Academic discussions often regard this as a paradox. The bedroom is the safest place in the castle, but also the most vulnerable one. Once a ruler falls asleep, he is defenseless. The strength of each lock depends on the loyalty of the key holder. Scholars debate whether these elaborately designed safety procedures bring true mental peace, or merely emphasize danger and make sleep more anxious. Now, put yourself in that uneasy place. You are curled up in the blanket, your eye tight pulled very low with a dagger beside you. The waiter was breathing gently. Outside the door, a guard moved his body a little, and the chainmail made a faint jingling sound. Every sound was amplified in the darkness: the groans of wood, the hissing of fire, and the clicking of the wind on the blinds. You wait for the danger that will never come until finally exhaustion drags you into an uneasy dream. When dawn breaks, the bolts will be pulled apart with the howling of iron. The waiters queued up to enter. The cheerful voice announced the arrival of the morning. The fear of the night soon vanished and was swallowed up by rituals and conventions. But deep down in your heart, you remember it. It is disturbing that no matter how thick the door is or how many latches it is locked, sleeping is always a gamble. You walked back to the corridor and closed the heavy door behind you. You know, in medieval castles, safety was never absolute. Locks, guards, and loyalty from a fragile net surrounding the royal bed, which could hold up or break at any moment. Sleep, despite all kinds of rituals, is always shrouded in danger. The next section of the road will not take you to the royal room, but to a secluded wing connected to the castle chapel. The walls here are bare, the air is cooler and the atmosphere is quieter. You will find that this is a completely different world of sleep. In the monastery parent the simple rhythms shape how the men and women of God spend the winter nights. For kings and queens, the proximity of monasteries and churches often meant constant comparisons. Compared with a simple sleep in the monastery, their own room seemed extremely luxurious. From the rules of monasteries like the Benedictine order, we know that monks should rest collectively in long dormitories. Privacy is rare. Rows of beds or trays are arranged in the hall, sometimes only separated by thin partitions or curtains. The emphasis on equality. No monk's bed is better than others. Warmth is the least. Straw mats, simple wool blankets, and perhaps capes draped over the shoulders minus all these are things that protect them from the cold. You are now stuck in the imagined tomb. There was straw, wax and the smell of people in the room. The window was narrow and the blinds were creaking in the wind. A candle is burning at the far end, with more symbolic meaning than practical significance. Silence is necessary, even though coughing and sighing break the stillness. The impact of cold on everyone is equal. This reminds us that in this life, humility even extends to sleep. One detail of the Shiduo Hui house stands out. Monks are often asked to sleep according to their habits and it ready to get up immediately for the midnight vigil. Imagine the scratches left by coarse hair rubbing against exposed skin. When you lie on the straw, the belt around your waist is tight. Comfort sacrifices for preparation. The body is regarded as a tool for dedication rather than a vessel for luxury. Strangely enough, some nunnery records show that during the cold winter, there were a few additional coverings, such as woolen headscarves or pleated nuntalpices. You can imagine the sisters crowded beneath layer upon layer, their prayers coming through their trembling teeth. Even here, the hierarchical system has quietly emerged. Monasteries sometimes enjoy thicker blankets, but by royal standards, this is still moderate. Scholars are still debating how much the practice of the monastery influenced the life of the royal family. Some people believe that, for the sake of religious ideals, kings and queens would occasionally develop simple habits in their bedrooms, limit luxury, prefer wool over silk, or have few companions during the season of repentance. Others insist that the royal family seldom imitates true frugality, they prefer rituals to sacrifices. The truth may lie within the symbolic meaning. By acknowledging the monk's sleep, monarchs strengthened their connection with piety, but seldom fully accepted its discomfort. Now imagine the comparison. After imagining the cemetery, you return to the royal room. The fire was piled up thickly, the fire was burning brighter, and the waiters were wandering around to ensure warmth. However, in the minds of the king and queen, the image of the monk shivering on the straw beds lingered on. Perhaps, knowing that others lead such a devout life can alleviate their sense of guilt. Perhaps this proves their own luxury, which is regarded as a necessity for the rulers rather than an aesthetic dispensable. This change in feeling is dramatic. In the cemetery, you can hear the rustling of straw, the whispers of lassen hymns before dawn, and the dragging of bare feet on the stones. In the palace you can hear whispers, the hissing of fire basins and the rustling of silk curtains. Both worlds endure the cold, but one world regards it as discipline, while the other struggles against it with wealth. There is an unusual anecdote circulating in the chronicle of King Louis IX of France. Because of his piety, he sometimes insisted on sleeping on straw during Lent, even though his courtier enjoyed feather mattresses. This incident indignant some of the attendants and impressed others, but it highlighted the way in which the monastic ideals occasionally violated the practices of the royal family. Whether he slept well or not is an entirely different matter. Modern experts still have differences on this. Does such a posture reflect genuine discomfort, or is it a symbolic performance for the sake of moral authority? Perhaps both are present. In any case, the monarch's acceptance of the simple image of monasticism for a period of time increased the weight of the views shared by the ruler and the tests of the people. Let's go to the dormitory of the monastery now. You lay on straw, wrapped in a rough blanket, and your breath formed mist in the air. Around you, rows of people breathe in unison, and their snoring and sighs create a strange harmony. The bell is about to ring, summoning you to rise in the darkness and pray. Sleep is shallow, fragmented and shaped by dedication. Sleep, wake up and sleep again, always feeling cold. Then imagine walking into the Queen's perfume room again from there. This impact is far minus reaching.